Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
You'd think after 42 years, a woman would stop needing her mother's approval like it's some kind of rare oxygen. You'd think she'd stop counting how many times her mother smiled at her sister versus her. But I guess childhood wounds don't grow old, they just stretch out, settle into the bones, and pretend to be part of your posture. On Sunday night, like most Sundays, we had dinner at my mom's. Same roast chicken, same tired mashed potatoes with way too much butter, same off-white plates that I swear haven't changed since Reagan was president. I stood at the sink, scraping congealed fat into the trash when Mom looked up from her chair, the one she always sat in, slightly sunken from years of judgmental presence, and said it like she was commenting on the weather. "You'll always be second best, Lena. Doesn't mean you're not loved, just means someone else got there first." I didn't respond. I just smiled like a waitress faking it for a tip, rinsed off the plate, and let the scalding water distract me. I'd heard versions of that same line since I was about 9 years old. Only back then, it was, "Kara's just more driven," or "You should be more like your sister," or my personal favorite, "Some girls just shine a little brighter." The subtext never changed, it just got wrapped in slightly nicer paper over the years. Now it was a half-assed attempt at wisdom. I didn't buy it. I never did. Kara showed up 20 minutes late, as usual, breezing in with her hair freshly blown out, still wearing her Pilates clothes like they were some sort of status symbol. She handed Mom a pie from the grocery store, the label still on it, and got fawned over like she'd baked it from scratch after curing cancer. "You always bring such thoughtful things, sweetheart," Mom gushed, patting her hand. I didn't say a word. Just kept carving the chicken while the skin crackled under the knife. Dinner went the way it usually did, Kara dominating conversation, Mom doting on her, and me playing the background like a piece of furniture. At one point, Kara started bragging about this potential work trip to Tuscany, which probably meant she was tagging along on her boyfriend's retreat again. But who was I to interrupt the fantasy? I passed the peas. That was my role. I was always good at passing things attention, credit, even blame. After dessert, when Kara had gone to the living room to take a call on speakerphone, of course, because why not make her conversation the center of the house too, I noticed an envelope sitting on the console table near the stairs. It was thick, old-fashioned, the kind with actual sealing glue and no branding. I hadn't seen my mom get much mail that wasn't bills or catalogs in years. I picked it up out of habit, not really thinking about it, but I caught the name on the return address. Dorothy M. I didn't recognize it. "Mail for you," I said, holding it out as she wiped crumbs from the table into her palm. She took it without looking at me, opened it, started to read. And then everything about her face shifted. It was subtle at first, her eyes slowing down, jaw going stiff. But then she froze completely. Fork still in hand, paper trembling just a little. Not a sound. Kara came back in, laughing about something on her phone, then looked at Mom and stopped. You okay?" she asked, a little thrown. No answer. Just silence. The kind that feels too thick to cut through, even with noise. I waited. Still nothing. It hit me then, that something in that letter must have reached right down into the parts of my mother that even I couldn't get near, the parts she kept tightly locked behind decades of stoic parenting and passive-aggressive compliments. And for the first time in my life, I saw her look shaken. Not angry. Not disappointed. Just hollowed out. Like someone had taken out her batteries and left her on pause. I thought about asking what the letter said. Thought about grabbing it from her hands and reading it right there. But something told me to wait. If it was about me, she'd never tell me. If it was about Kara, she'd find a way to make me feel like it was my fault. But if it was about her? That was new. That was territory she'd never let us into before. So I cleared the rest of the plates, humming something under my breath, just to cut through the weirdness. Kara kept staring. Mom still hadn't moved. Eventually I said, "I'll just take care of the rest," and walked to the kitchen, heart pounding harder than it should have been. I don't know why I didn't push her then. Maybe because I was scared the letter would prove everything I'd suspected but never had the nerve to confirm, that my place in this family was never solid, never earned, and maybe never even real. I waited for her to speak. She didn't. The table still had 3 legs, but one of them just stopped holding weight. And I had a feeling that whatever was in that letter, it was about to tip the whole thing over. I couldn't sleep, and it wasn't the coffee or the Sunday roast sitting heavy in my stomach or even the endless loop of Kara's voice still echoing through the kitchen walls. It was the letter. The thick one with the strange handwriting that pulled the blood from my mother's face like a sudden drop in cabin pressure. I laid in bed for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling like it might start speaking to me if I waited long enough, thinking about how still she had gone, how tight her lips were clenched when I walked past her chair, how the air in the room had gone from warm and buttery to ice cold without any warning. It was sometime after midnight when I finally swung my legs over the side of the bed, still fully dressed, because I hadn't bothered to change, and padded quietly down the stairs like I used to do as a teenager when I'd sneak into the kitchen for a spoonful of peanut butter I wasn't supposed to have. Only this time, the thing I was after wasn't sweet or soft or forgiving. The envelope was still there on the console table, right where she'd left it, as if she'd forgotten it existed or maybe couldn't bear to touch it again. The flap was curled back like it had been opened in a hurry, and the pages inside were still slightly bent. She hadn't hidden it. That was the first surprise. I took the letter out slowly, careful not to make noise, like I was handling a confession too hot to hold. There were 3 pages, handwritten in blue ink, with that old cursive script that reminded me of the nuns who used to grade my Sunday school worksheets. The first thing I saw was the name, Dorothy M., and the opening line, "I've carried this burden long enough, and I pray you'll understand why I'm writing now." I kept reading, and with each sentence, my knees got a little weaker. Dorothy explained that she had worked as a nurse at St. Margaret's Hospital in 1981, back when birth records were still logged manually and the maternity ward was still understaffed and chaotic. There had been a storm that night, she said, and the power had gone out twice. She didn't get into specifics. Maybe she didn't know them all, but what she did say was this: there was a mix-up. 2 baby girls were taken from the nursery and returned to the wrong mothers. I only figured it out later, and by then, your mother had already gone home. I sat down right there on the bottom step of the staircase, the paper trembling in my hands, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. She didn't say, "You might not be her daughter," she said. "You're not Elaine Whitmore's biological child." Just like that. No hedging, no suggestion. A flat-out fact. And then came the kicker, the part that made the whole thing unbearable. I never told anyone. I kept it to myself for over 42 years, which is about 3 decades. I know I don't have much time left. The cancer's in my liver now. But you deserve the truth. It happened 42 years ago, which is about 3 decades. That's what she wrote. I almost laughed at how wrong that was. Not just the math, which was obviously off, unless decades had suddenly become 14 years long, but the casual way she admitted it, like confessing to accidentally overwatering a plant. You don't just accidentally switch babies and shrug it off for 4 decades like a bad recipe. I read the letter 3 more times before I tucked it back into the envelope, then stood there in the hallway with my hands shaking, my skin cold even though the house was warm. Every single part of me wanted to believe it was a scam, some elaborate, sick attempt to stir up drama or get money or mess with my mother. But then I thought about how Elaine had looked earlier, frozen in that chair like someone had pulled the rug out from under her entire life, and I knew. Somewhere deep down, I knew she wasn't shocked because it was fake. She was shocked because it was true. Still, I didn't say anything. I didn't storm back upstairs and demand answers, didn't shake her awake like a scene out of a made-for-TV movie. Instead, I waited. I needed more than just a letter from a dying woman with questionable math skills. I needed proof. So I decided I would start looking. The next morning, I went back to my place under the guise of needing to grade papers, which was technically true. But the moment I walked in, I headed straight for the back closet, where I kept the bin of old family photo albums and paperwork that Mom had passed off to me when she downsized last year. She probably didn't even remember what she gave me, just another burden she'd shoved into my arms without asking. I dug through old birthday photos, school pictures where Kara always stood in the front row and I was always stuck somewhere in the back, half blinking. There were hospital bracelets, baby teeth in tiny envelopes, locks of hair wrapped in tissue. Then I found it. A plastic sleeve with 2 birth certificates inside. Kara's was crisp and clean, typed neatly with all the boxes filled out. Mine was different. Older. Yellowed at the edges. But the name printed under infant wasn't mine. It wasn't even close. That's when the world tilted sideways. Because for the first time in my life, I had evidence. Not feelings. Not memories. Not vague resentment over being ignored at dinner. This was real. And it meant something. Maybe everything. I closed the album slowly, my heart beating faster than it had any right to, my mind already racing. If Mom had known, truly known for all these years, that I wasn't hers, then every word, every slight, every cold stare, every moment of favoritism wasn't just a mother being tough or playing favorites. It was a woman punishing a stranger for existing. And I wasn't going to stay silent for long. The phone number scrawled at the bottom of the letter haunted me for 2 whole days before I finally dialed it, my fingers trembling like they used to when I first learned piano and knew I was about to hit all the wrong notes. I had half convinced myself it would be disconnected, or maybe some teenager would answer, completely confused as to why some woman was asking for a dying nurse named Dorothy. But when a voice finally came on the line, raspy, thin, and yet eerily composed, I knew I had reached her. "Hello?" she said, like someone who already knew why I was calling. I introduced myself slowly, cautiously, like a stranger knocking on the wrong door. She paused, then said, "I was wondering when you'd call." Her voice sounded like paper that had been folded too many times, thin, delicate, and carrying a weight far older than her breath. I didn't know what to say at first. I stumbled through questions that sounded too formal and polite for what I really wanted to know. But Dorothy didn't hesitate. She told me everything in one breath, like someone reciting a confession that's been written, edited, and rehearsed for years. She had worked at St. Margaret's for over 20 years and remembered that week in October clearly not because of me, but because of what she called the accident. 2 girls, born 2 days apart, close in weight, one mother sedated heavily due to complications, another never arrived because she went into labor on the highway and delivered in the back of a truck. Chaos, as she called it. The night shift lost power twice, and when the backup generators kicked in, records weren't logged properly. Somewhere along the way, I was handed to the wrong woman, or, to be more precise, Elaine accepted me and never said otherwise. I sat in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, heart loud enough to drown out the fridge humming behind me. "So she knew?" I asked, barely able to form the words. Dorothy didn't answer right away. Then she sighed, not a regular sigh, but the kind that sounded like it had years of guilt packed into it. "Not at first," she said quietly. But the truth found her. About 6 months later. My stomach dropped. She knew. For almost my entire life, she knew I wasn't hers. And she still kept me. Kept me like someone keeps the packaging for a gift they didn't really want. But what Dorothy said next, that part rewrote everything. She told me Kara wasn't Elaine's biological child either. Kara was brought in through a private arrangement, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The Whitmores couldn't have children, not biologically. That's what triggered the adoption. But Kara's case was different. She came from a family who wanted her kept quiet. There was money, lawyers, secrecy. I felt the air suck out of the room. For years, I thought Kara was the one who belonged, the one who was born to be adored, while I was the extra will squeaking in the background. But we were both adopted. The difference? Kara was chosen. I was available. Dorothy admitted that she only kept one copy of the original hospital logs, pages she wasn't supposed to have, documents she'd taken home that night out of fear that something awful had been done. She offered to send them to me if I wanted them. I didn't even hesitate. "Please," I whispered, voice cracking. "Send everything." After we hung up, I sat there for nearly an hour without moving, just watching the dust float through the morning light, thinking about how my whole life had been defined by being second to Kara. And it wasn't even because she was better. It was because she had a ribbon around her story, money, mystery, parents who mattered. I was the clearance bin child. The one they got because someone else backed out. When the envelope arrived 3 days later, I opened it alone, sitting cross-legged on the floor of my living room like I was back in college opening rejection letters from grad schools. Inside were copies of intake sheets, logbooks, and a scan of an adoption notice signed by a lawyer I'd never heard of. No names I recognized. No big red arrows saying you were switched here. But enough smoke to point to fire. I didn't call Mom. I didn't confront her. I didn't even tell Kara. What would I say? "Hey, guess what? We're both adopted." Surprise, your entire sense of superiority is built on nothing but lies and sealed envelopes. I didn't say a word. Instead, I started planning. Not revenge in the classic sense. I wasn't going to scream, throw plates, or write a scathing letter of my own. That wasn't my style. I'd been quiet too long, swallowed too many insults, and served too many damn mashed potatoes at that table to suddenly become dramatic. No, if I was going to respond, it had to be like her. Cold. Calculated. Wrapped in the kind of civility that makes it hit twice as hard. So I invited them over for another Sunday dinner. I made it sound like nothing had changed, even threw in a line about wanting to reconnect, start fresh, maybe play a game like we used to. Kara seemed surprised but agreed. Mom, ever the master of forced smiles, said she'd bring dessert. I cleaned the house like I was preparing for war. Set the table with the good dishes, the ones we never used except when company came. And I printed something special, a stack of cards that looked like a trivia game, each one with a question on the front and no answers on the back. Questions only I knew the answers to now. I was going to play by their rules. I was going to be polite, gracious, warm. And then I was going to start pulling threads, one by one, until the whole golden image my mother had built, this fantasy where Kara was the shining daughter and I was the disappointing echo, unraveled right in her face. And the best part? She wouldn't even see it coming. When you've spent a lifetime learning how to swallow your pride, how to keep your mouth shut at the exact moment your heart is screaming, you eventually develop a skill for pretending, for smiling with your lips while your eyes carry every damn bruise. That Sunday, I didn't just smile, I hosted. I planned the dinner like I was arranging a funeral with champagne and chicken, cheerful on the surface, but everything about it was meant to bury something deep. I picked out the wine my mother liked, though I never understood her taste for dry things that burned on the way down. I used linen napkins I hadn't touched in years, the ones she gave me at 26 and told me were too nice to waste on myself. I even roasted the chicken just like she used to. Dry and oversalted, with the skin blistered in patches because that's how Kara said she liked it, the taste of childhood, she once called it, as if scorched bird and boiled carrots were some Norman Rockwell memory. I added rosemary only to spite them both, knowing full well Mom said it tasted like old perfume. By the time they arrived, everything was arranged perfectly. Candles flickered in the holders from my grandmother's set, the tablecloth ironed within an inch of its life, the glasses filled halfway, just like she always did, never trusting anyone not to spill. Kara walked in first, suspicious as hell, wearing a navy blazer like she was attending a corporate gala instead of dinner with her sister. She kissed my cheek in that half-hearted way people do when they're not sure if they're in a trap. Mom followed behind her, slower than usual, her purse clutched tight like it contained secrets instead of mints and tissues. "Smells good," Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. She scanned the room like she was searching for a hidden agenda, which, of course, she was right to suspect. I welcomed them both like nothing was amiss, poured the wine, asked about Kara's Tuscany trip, which, as I suspected, turned out to be a failed plan due to bad timing and a boyfriend with commitment issues. We ate in near silence for the first 10 minutes, the occasional clink of forks on plates filling the awkward gaps between strained conversation and Kara's increasingly desperate attempts to pivot the mood. Mom barely touched her food. She just kept dabbing at the corners of her mouth, looking from me to Kara like she expected one of us to explode. Then I brought out the cards. "Remember the old trivia game we used to play?" I asked, cheerful and bright like I hadn't spent the last week crafting every question with surgical precision. I thought it might be fun to try again, shake off the tension, you know? Kara raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Sure," she said. "I'm game if you are, Mom." Mom stared at the cards as I placed them on the table, her face unreadable, but her hands, those gave her away. Her fingers twitched once, then stilled. She nodded. I shuffled the deck like a casino dealer and pulled the first card. "Okay," I said, grinning. "First question. Who was born in a clinic that burned down in 1983? I let the silence stretch as I looked between them. Kara frowned. "What kind of trivia is this?" she asked, laughing nervously. I shrugged. "Just some fun facts. You know, family history. Let's try another." I flipped the second card. Which daughter won the state spelling bee in 4th grade and didn't get a hug afterward because the other one had a dentist appointment? Kara looked at me sharply. Mom didn't look at anyone. Her fork was frozen halfway to her mouth. "One more," I said, not waiting for an answer. "Who wrote the anonymous letter about a birth switch and kept it a secret for 4 decades? The air changed then, not dramatically, not loudly, but in that slow, suffocating way you feel when a storm starts pressing down on the house, and you're not sure which window will blow first." Kara's face turned pale, her mouth slightly open. Mom's hand, the one holding the fork, began to tremble just enough to clink it against her plate. "What is this, Lena?" Kara's voice was sharp now, the facade slipping. "What the hell are you doing?" I smiled again, but this time, it reached my eyes. "Just playing a game," I said. "Same one we've always played, you know, where I pretend everything's fine, and Mom pretends she never picked favorites." "You're drunk," my mother said suddenly, voice cold and clipped. "This is nonsense." I stood slowly, my chair sliding back just enough to make the wooden legs groan. I reached into the drawer behind me and pulled out the second envelope, a little thicker than the first. No return address, no stamp. This one came from me. I placed it beside her plate, careful not to spill the wine as I leaned in. "This one's for me," I said, my voice calm and even. "You'll want to open it after dessert." Neither of them moved. Kara looked like she was trying to figure out if this was real or some twisted performance art. Mom stared at the envelope like it might explode if she touched it. I sat back down and picked up my wine. Took a slow sip. "I made apple tart," I added. "Same when you like, Kara. Only this time, I used real apples, not canned." No one laughed. And that was fine with me. She didn't open it right away, of course not, because that would have meant giving me the upper hand, and Elaine Whitmore had spent a lifetime avoiding anything that looked like vulnerability, especially if it came wrapped in a plain white envelope handed to her by the daughter she never fully claimed. She sat there, staring at it like it might bite, her eyes darting between the thick seal and my face, trying to read whether I was bluffing or delivering a final blow. Kara's gaze moved back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match she hadn't trained for, her expression stiff with confusion, eyebrows pulled tight the way they did when she didn't understand the rules of the game anymore. "No need to rush," I said, cool and quiet, swirling the last of the wine in my glass, watching it lap against the sides like blood too tired to boil. "Take your time. It's not going anywhere." And then, like a scene out of some suburban parody, I stood up and cleared the plates, because that's what I'd always done. I scraped half-eaten chicken and untouched green beans into the trash with the same hands that had once held ribbons no one clapped for, trophies no one dusted, poems no one read out loud. I washed the dishes slowly, methodically, not because they needed it. Honestly, I should have left them crusted and hard like the tension hanging in that dining room, but because it gave me a moment to breathe. I could hear them talking low behind me, Kara's voice hushed and nervous, Mom's nearly inaudible. I imagined the envelope sitting on the table like a ticking clock, its truth pressing against the air harder with every second. She refused to tear it open. Eventually, she did. I heard the rip, sharp and reluctant, followed by that long, stunned pause people make when the thing they feared turned out to be exactly what they feared. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She didn't throw it across the room or shout that I was lying. Instead, she said nothing at all, not a sound, not even a breath. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. Kara broke first. "What is this?" she snapped, voice trembling. "What does this mean?" Her voice cracked at the end of the question, and when I turned around, I saw her holding the DNA report, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping it so tightly the paper bent in the middle. She looked at me like I'd betrayed her, like I'd pulled the rug out from under her world, even though she'd spent her whole life walking on carpets I'd never been invited to touch. "It means," I said, drying my hands on the dish towel, "that neither of us is hers. Not biologically, anyway. You came from some wealthy family that didn't want scandal. I came from a mix-up they couldn't undo. But she raised us. Or at least she raised something in us." I looked at Mom then, her face still pale, her eyes cast downward like a guilty child caught red-handed. And she made sure we never forgot who the favorite was, even if neither of us had her blood. Kara blinked fast, like she was trying to rewind the scene and rewrite the script, but the paper didn't lie. The DNA report was clear, with percentages and lineages and phrases like no significant maternal markers. I'd gotten it done 2 weeks earlier, saliva sealed in a tube and mailed off with shaking fingers. It came back fast, faster than I expected, and when it did, I just stared at the email for 10 minutes straight, wondering how a single document could feel both like freedom and a slap to the face. I poured another glass of wine and sat back down at the table, letting the weight of my words sink in. "Don't worry," I said softly, lifting the glass to my lips. "I'm not here to ruin your legacy. I just wanted you to know. You built your whole life on a lie, and still managed to fail both your daughters." I stood, tucked the chair in gently, and walked out without another word, the sound of my heels clicking on the tile louder than any scream I could have thrown at her. They didn't follow me. They couldn't. Because when a person's world cracks like that, they don't run after the one holding the hammer. They just sit in the rubble, stunned, and try to remember what the floor felt like before it disappeared. A week later, Kara texted me. No emojis, no warm-up, no signature. Just 6 bitter words. "She's not talking. Not eating. You happy?" I stared at the screen for a full minute before typing my reply. "Not yet." Then I put my phone down and turned off the light. Months passed. I didn't hear from either of them. I expected Kara to send some long-winded apology or a lecture or maybe even a veiled threat, but nothing came. It was as if we'd all agreed to hold our breath and see who drowned first. And maybe I was fine with that. Maybe silence was finally fair. Then one morning, just after Christmas, I found another letter in my mailbox. No return address. The handwriting was shaky but neat, the kind of script that came from someone who took their time, who thought each word through before committing to ink. I opened it slowly, my fingers careful, my breath caught halfway down my chest. "You're not who you think you are," it began. "Dorothy left things out. There's more. A lot more. Meet me. I have more to tell you." And then at the bottom, a name I didn't recognize. Not Dorothy. Not Kara. Not Elaine. Someone new. I folded the paper slowly, tucked it into my coat pocket, and stood there for a long time, staring at nothing in particular. A dog barked in the distance. A neighbor's car pulled into their driveway. Life went on, as it does, indifferent to revelations and ruined family dinners. Guess I'm still not done being second best.